Hello, students. This is part 2 of chapter 39.3, After Independence, Long-Term Struggles in Post-Colonial Era. Think about the title. So it's after the independence. They got independence from European powers or Western powers or whatever it might have been. And now they got, after colonial, the Europeans have left, and now they got some issues because of the extraction of those powers and the setup of the stability that those places offered because they were claiming them for their old stuff. And now when they're left on their own, they have some trouble because they've never had the practice of running the things on their own. So a couple of things are happening. And today we're going to focus on Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and include an element on the apartheid element. So here we go. So in Latin America, Mexico in particular is a kind of epitome of some of the troubles and struggles that they had. So failed attempts to redistribute land. I should have added more, but in particular there's a couple things that take place. So some of the things that happened in Mexico was with Lázaro Cárdenas, who in the 1930s, after independence, seeks to distribute some of the land. He's one of the few that actually set up the land and everything. And from that time on, after him, a group came into power called the PRI, P-R-I, and they essentially started an autocracy. And they worked with a group called the CTM, which is a union, to maintain power in this area. And so with them, an oligarchy was essentially formed where a small group of people became incredibly wealthy while the vast majority of people stayed kind of in a poor situation. And it accounts for one of the main reasons people left Mexico and started to immigrate. So here in the United States, we say, oh, they're coming across the border. Well, this is why, because there's little opportunity in their home country, because there's a group of people who came into power, maintain their power, and are working to keep their wealth. Okay. In Argentina, the home of Messi, by the way, Lionel Messi, the top goal scorer in the UEFA. In Argentina, military started to dominate. They had an elected government, and then military coup takes over, and Juan Perón is one of the guys who comes on the heels of this thing. He's elected president after he and a group of people started to push for a coup type thing, and he's incredibly popular with a group of people, but also very unpopular with certain people who don't like him because he's kind of autocratic. He marries his wife Evita, and your book gives a big thing on Evita, and she was popular and everything, but as far as, yeah, I don't know. Anyways, they have popular support and nationalism, and this is in the 1940s, and there's a tinge of nationalism and fascism amongst them because they're for a strong Argentina, a strong military, a strong industrial power, and that everyone else should work for the benefit of the society, in particular Argentina. So a little spooky on that element, okay? But they do some things to elevate the status of Argentina, make it a little bit more powerful, and definitely the more dominant group in South America. Guatemala and Nicaragua, this is where the U.S. comes into play, has been the center of U.S. intervention for a long, long time. In particular, there's a couple companies in this area who, American companies, are down there and invested quite a bit of money and time and effort into this place, in particular United Fruit and some other groups who have huge, massive fruit plantations in the area. At one point, I forget what the percentage is, but those U.S. companies own nearly half or more than half of all the arable land, growing land, in the place, which didn't leave much land for the actual people who live there. But since they had wealth and everything, they controlled this stuff, and they used their influence to have Americans select or have Americans support them, and also to select the leaders of the country. This shows kind of what's called Yankee imperialism that we talked about earlier, and kind of a distrust for American stuff because we're just benefiting our countries as opposed to helping out the people of Guatemala and Nicaragua. So the U.S. interventions on local governments attempt to control the U.S. economic interests, and this results in what we call the U.S. Policy. Things change in the 70s when Jimmy Carter's elected, and he starts to cut back on some of that type of attitude in the sense that he's trying to regain the trust of the areas and try to, I guess you would say, do the right thing by give control to the area to the people who live there as opposed to the companies. And so this is where he ends support for the military regimes that were controlling Guatemala and Nicaragua, and he also gives back the Panama Canal territory to Panama. It's an extended deal. They signed it in the 70s, but it doesn't take place until the 1990s to give them Panama a chance to prepare for this. Well, Carter's voted out of office after one term, and in comes Reagan, and he stops that stuff, and he's anti-communist in a sense. Well, not in a sense, definitely anti-communist, and he works to roll back the efforts that Carter made okay, and to reinstall a group in power into the Contras in Nicaragua, who are counter-revolutionaries to the semi-socialist, semi-communist government that was in power and democratically elected. So he funds money and equipment into the Contras, which is illegal. He gets caught, and they still continue to fund it, and then he gets caught again because they're doing this stuff. And then he issues what he calls plausible deniability, which is great for old people and teachers who don't remember things, where he says, I don't remember, I don't recall type of thing. But it shows the U.S. attitude towards these groups, where we're going to help any not anti-communist group, regardless of how mean they might be to their people, how they might tramp on what we call civil rights or human rights. So this is just a standard example of this stuff. The next thing, we'll jump over to Africa, the Establishment or Organization of African Unity, the OAU. This was formed in 1962, and it's an effort to unite the newly independent nations of Africa and older independent nations of Africa into some sort of African unity to try to balance themselves out, to help themselves out so they don't fall to control of the U.S. or USSR under the bipolar world. They also want to clean up any boundary issues. So one of the things they do is they say, boundaries are set. Let's just deal with them. I know that the Europeans set them, but these are the boundaries as they are. And instead of fighting for that, because we'll never settle that issue, let's just move on to that. And so I think, in my opinion, that's one of the brighter things, is that they just put that off the table, because that's what many groups wanted to fight over. You know, this is my boundary, then my drone, that's my boundary, and that would cause huge amount of chaos where they wouldn't be able to move on to other things. So they also promote the idea of Pan-Africanism, an idea to try to push Africa for Africa. The problem is that they're dealing with ages and ages of tribal groups who sometimes get along and sometimes fight with each other, and so that's something that's very, very hard for them to get through. This is shown in the ethnic failure or the ethnic strike that takes place in Kenya under Nkrumah, who's deposed in 1966. Okay, I'm sorry, in Ghana, excuse me. And it shows that even this is a guy that started African nationalism in his country and got African independence, and he can't keep his groups from fighting each other. And he's kicked out, and he's replaced by a military general. And this is kind of the example of what's going to happen. These democracies, they're small, they're young, they're unstable, things don't go well, and pretty soon they fall susceptible to military coups, or the military taking over and running it in kind of a dictatorial regime. Okay, so our picture of a bad movie with the African general in charge. And then we'll go to South Africa, which is a kind of a different story all by itself. South Africa was a settler colony of both the British and the Dutch, and they have won independence, and now they institute this thing called apartheid. So within South Africa, there's quite a few ethnic groups in there. The vast majority, the biggest chunk of people are black people. Then there's a small group of white people, and there's also groups of Indians and other Asian people who have migrated there for work and jobs. Okay. In 1948, they officially set up a apartheid movement. Okay, they gained independence in 47. There's some control issues and debate about who's going to control, and then they officially set up an apartheid system. This is just like segregation in the South of the United States. So take a look at the sign I have right there, white area. This is a beach area. It's for whites only. So black people are not allowed to be at this beach or to hang out on this beach because it is a whites only beach. So I'll show you a picture of the disparity in what happens. Okay, and then down below is the slums that are outside of one of the main cities. This is outside of Johannesburg, which is the main city, South Africa. But it just shows the condition. So that little hut right there is where a family will live. It's got one door, one window, maybe two windows, and it just, it is a very different thing. So people say, separate but equal. This is definitely separate, but it is nowhere near equal, just like in the United States in the 50s, 60s, and prior to that stuff. What they do set up is the African National Congress is established in 1955, and that's set up to seek independence for Africa. Just like the Indian National Congress, this is the African National Congress to set up independence or civil rights for for Africans in South Africa. They're fought against by the white minority who have control. repression of the ANC causes worldwide ostracism of South Africa. In other words, people say, that's not nice. And for a long, long time, they say not nice. But at the same time, many of the groups in particular are doing business with them. And it's not until the 1980s, 80, that some groups take it a little bit more fervent and start to report, here, America is doing businesses. They start to talk about American businesses who are doing business in there and research and stuff like that. In particular, they attack universities and say, hey, Stanford University's giving a lot of money to South Africa to go do research in that place. And people go, well, Stanford's supposed to be kind of a liberal college. What are they doing like that? They say, oh, well, they give it to them. Okay? And this creates pressure, and finally there's going to be some pressure on South Africa to change things. Okay? So here's a typical example. Take a look. Population of blacks, 19 million. Population of whites, 4.5 million. Land allocation, 13 million. Land allocation for whites, 87%. Okay? I'm sorry, land allocation for blacks, 13%, okay, and 87% for whites. Share of the national income, less than 20%, 75% for whites. Let's take a look at something that kind of makes doctors. One doctor for every 44,000. Whites, one doctor for every 400. Okay, infant mortality rate, 2.7 for whites. Okay, and look at blacks, 20%. So 2 out of 10 kids are going to die if they're black. Okay, in the urban. Okay, and 4 out of 10 are going to die if they live in the countryside. So this is like kind of the oh look, hey, it's just like our school right here, 160, one teacher for every 60 students. How wonderful! So this is a system that's created because of this apartheid, and it just shows the disparity in this stuff. Okay, and so people try to justify it. Well, the people that justify it, it's like trying to justify the segregation in the South. Okay. This is a guy named Nelson Mandela right here, and he's talking to Stephen Biko, I'm pretty sure. No, Walter Sisulu, who's another guy who went to prison. They're part of the ANC. They were part of the militant branch of the ANC at one point. Early started on to just protest, and then a more militant branch, and he gets arrested, and he's going to be sent to jail. There's a cool song by the Specials. Okay, maybe we'll play it one day. Dismantling apartheid. After lots and lots and lots of protests, worldwide protests, finally apartheid starts to hit the front stage. So in 1990, Nelson Mandela was released, and this is a big event. 21 years in captivity. Are you so blind that you cannot see? That's part of the song. Anyways, Mandela's released, and it's a big fanfare. Who is locked up for threatening to do certain things and without a full, clear trial. And then they start to negotiate the end of white minority. It's this guy named F.W. de Klerk, the elected president of South Africa at that time, who starts to push for this stuff. So it's between him and Mandela. They set up the plan to how to negotiate this thing, and they're smart enough not to do it just overnight, that it's got to be kind of staggered so it happens. And then by 1994, they have the first statewide election in which black people get to vote, okay, and overwhelmingly, since they're the vast majority of the population, they vote, and in comes to the picture Nelson Mandela, president of South Africa. So after years and years of protest and movements and stuff, something finally happens. And they relatively calm transition to democratic society, and mainly because South Africa has the strongest economy in sub-Saharan Africa by far, so it helps them to transition. Even today, however, if you go there, and in particular, having watched the World Cup and read about it, it still kind of has quite a bit of disparity between the rich and the poor, and there's a high amount of crime in this area. Rwanda shows the perils of the other thing, where it doesn't succeed. Rwanda shows the other side of the cone, where the transition doesn't succeed. So Rwanda was controlled by the Belgians. They pull out. And once they pull out, things go to heck in a handbasket. There was a group called the Tutsis who was controlled. They're purposely put in control to kind of keep down the power of the Hutus. And once the European power leaves, a civil war breaks out in 1994 after the president's killed, assassinated, and they blame the other group. And around a group of Hutus go around killing any Tutsis, and they blame the Tutsis for the repression, where the repression was really carried out by the Belgians and enforced by the Tutsis. But regardless, the Tutsis are being massacred, even if they're not fighting back, and all sorts of terrible, terrible, terrible stuff. Hotel Rwanda is a great movie. It's just kind of scary because it's real, about the persecution of these people and the genocide that takes place in this place. but it shows the level of violence that's going to ensue in these places because they're unstable. Hey, we finished. We finished.